boys and girls. So today we're going to continue to talk about main idea, and we're adding supporting details this week. So supporting details are the little ideas that all support, hold up, or prove the main idea. They're all the little things in the story that happen. Each little event is a supporting detail. So today we're going to read Enemy Pie. Now, based on the title, which we learned to look at last week, Enemy Pie is probably about two enemies. And maybe it has something to do with a pie. So we're going to see what the main idea is as we read, and then we'll pick out some supporting details. Enemy Pie by Derek Munson. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood right next door to my best friend, Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me at a baseball game. He had a party on a trampoline, and I wasn't even invited, but my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross is the one and only person on my enemy list. I never ever had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew a good way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you, he said. He pulled a really old book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a piece of worn-out scrap paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy Pie, he said, satisfied. You may be wondering exactly what enemy pie is. I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kinds of disgusting things would you put in an enemy pie? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, and he didn't think that I would need those. I gave him the gum I'd been chewing all morning. He gave it right back to me. I went to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending all the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it would smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. I went to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good. But Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. I could tell that he had made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang. Dad pulled on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked like a plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it would make their hair fall out or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There's one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend the day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way the enemy pie will work. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. I mean, it sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross. Then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on the door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. Can you play? I asked. He looked confused. I'll go ask my mom, he said. He came back with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. You boys stay out of trouble, she said, smiling. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighbor girls, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice, but of course I couldn't tell Dad that since he had worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win the game just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him in. And if Jeremy wanted in, can we go in it? He asked. I knew he was going to ask me that, but he was at the top person, the only person on my enemy list, and enemies are not allowed in the treehouse. But he did teach me how to throw a boomerang, and he did have me over for lunch, and he did let me play on his trampoline. It wasn't going to be a very good enemy. Okay, I said, but hold on. I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse. We played games until my dad called us for dinner. We pretended we didn't want to hear him, and when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite, and it was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut it into 8 thick slices. Dad, I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood. I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy, but Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. Wow, said Jeremy looking at the pie. My dad never makes pie like this. It was just at that point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat the enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. Jeremy, don't eat it! It's a bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something. Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumbled his eyebrows, looking at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy asked, then why has your dad already eaten half of it? I turned to look at my dad, and sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all that he said. I sat there watching them eat the enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing, Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed to be safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out or make their breath turn bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get the answer, because I just lost my best enemy. Okay, boys and girls, so our main idea in this story is mostly about a boy who has an enemy and how his dad helps him make enemy pie. That's our main idea. Supporting details are the things that prove our main idea. So we know that Jeremy had a party on the trampoline and didn't invite him. We know that the boys were not friends. We also know that Jeremy's dad decided to make an enemy, the boy's dad decided to make an enemy pie. He put in the ingredients, the boy played basketball and looked for ladybugs. He invited Jeremy to play. They threw water balloons, they played on the trampoline. These are all details that prove that there was an enemy pie that the boys ate together. So the main idea is that there were 2 boys who were enemies and they made an enemy pie. Everything else that happened are all details that support it. More things like they ate it together, they had dinner, they played in the treehouse. These are all details, the table legs that support our main idea, the big table. All right, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.